Alrighty, everyone, welcome to the ASA Committee on Law and Justice Statistics fifth webinar in our relatively new series. We'll schedule approximately 5 to 6 30-minute webinars per year on data sets and statistical methods and resources for the analysis of data in law and justice. Please stay in touch with the committee by filling out our Google form that I'll put in the chat to get on our listserv. Today, I'm really pleased to briefly introduce Lauren Atherley for this session on You Looking for Police Data? I Got a Guy, and he'll introduce himself in more detail. Details of our next webinar will be posted on our website soon. For today's session, Lauren's going to chat for a little bit, and then we'll have an open Q&A. We will moderate that through the Zoom Q&A feature, so please do put your questions in the Q&A really at any point, and then we'll get to those after Lauren's opening remarks. But with that, Lauren, you can take it away.
Great. Thanks for having me. I'm Lauren Atherley. I'm the Senior Director for Performance Analytics and Research at the Seattle Police Department and the Senior Research Scientist there. I like to open my public remarks by just mentioning that I don't necessarily represent the Seattle Police Department. Any mistakes are my own. And generally, although from time to time I do comment for the city of Seattle, these are my personal opinions and sort of based just in my experience as a scholar. So please don't refer to me to internal affairs or try to hold me to any of my opinions because that'll probably just get me into trouble. As I said before, I'm Lauren Atherley. I came to the Seattle Police Department in 2013 as part of our court-ordered reform process. Many of you may be familiar, but there is a process whereby the Department of Justice, the U.S. Department of Justice, is able to seek civil remedies under identification of a pattern or practice of unconstitutional policing. And a lot of police departments have gone through these processes, usually some of the larger police departments, and usually following fairly significant public events or kind of profound events of unconstitutional policing. So injurious use of force, really sort of shocking media events, those types of things tend to draw this type of attention. And the result typically is a court order stipulating that some changes be made and a settlement agreement. And as part of the settlement agreement for the Seattle Police Department, which I'm pleased to say was resolved just about 6 months ago, the entire process was sort of deemed to be complete at the end of summer in 2025. As part of that process, the settlement agreement essentially is this very highly structured plan for redressing some of the issues that were identified with the police department through that pattern or practice investigation. I had the privilege of joining just about when we were getting the infrastructure ready to be able to answer a lot of the very important questions, a lot of very, very important sort of research related questions that the consent decree was interested in, both in terms of scoping, the extent of police reforms, as well as turning the Seattle Police Department into a learning organization. And this is really typical of where we find a lot of police departments, especially in this day and age, in this sort of period of the Second Great Awakening, or what's referred to in criminology as the Second Great Awakening and police reform. We find a lot of those police reforms are evidence-based or really sort of driven by patterns that are identified in the data, being a little more intelligent in how resources are allocated, and being able to search for anomalies and maybe emergent trends and patterns, both in the criminological environment and also in the employee environment. Being responsive to those in a structured and responsible way not only makes the organization more effective, but also supports trust and legitimacy. And generally, I find lets the community and the public know that the police department is not asleep at the switch. So you can see, sort of briefly here from my background, I've pretty much made most of the last 10 years of my life or so about focusing on data, building out police data systems, building out the reporting systems, and in the process was recently named to the George Mason University Evansville Policing Hall of Fame and an NIJ lead scholar. I also just recently finished up my PhD. I'm thrilled to have that behind me. I don't think I'll do another one of those, but you never know. I might need to get one in statistics. Roughly speaking, for the next about 10, 15 minutes or so before we get into questions, I'm just going to give you kind of a high-level overview of what data is available. What are the most common ways that you, as a scholar, might be able to access those data or may be able to form partnerships with police that are near you or in an agency of interest to you? And then we'll kind of get into some Q&A to answer what specific questions you might have. Just because it's kind of difficult to give you a long address and get you my contact information, you can go ahead and click on the QR code and connect with me. And this is usually where I tell people to be careful about trusting any QR codes. You never know where it's going to take you. And I just rickrolled some of you. But seriously, I'm going to show you some QR codes throughout this to make it a little bit easier for you to be able to identify some of those resources. This one, I swear, just takes you to my online business card. Feel free to connect with me if you'd like some consultation on a project that you're working on, or you'd like to know kind of what data might be available. I'm more than happy to help you out. So police data is, I think, a little bit amorphous. When we think about police data, I think typically we think of police reports. Crime happens, a police officer responds to the scene, documents what crime occurred, and then there are a number of other steps that may be taken by detectives. Eventually that hopefully gets referred for prosecution, provides a little bit of closure for everybody involved. But police administrative records are a really rich resource, not just for criminological data. These are, sort of far and away beyond, sort of tightly constrained to what they appear to be. This is the administrative detritus that kind of comes out of the water column and is this rich source of information about how police departments function, about accountability processes, about performance of various elements, public safety answering points or 911 centers, co-responders. I recently used some of these data in my dissertation to be able to determine what roughly would be safe under a kind of a rational framework, an evidence-based framework for sending a non-police responder to. And so these data are really a rich resource for all sorts of research level kind of questions that you might have. Police data includes and generally starts with the call for service. That's a term of art. If you haven't really sort of been familiar with these terms, the call for service originates with the 911 center, that public safety answering point. Since the 1970s, every sort of jurisdiction in the United States began to roll that program out, very much the way that the program was sort of originally designed in the United Kingdom. The United States emulated that, and today, pretty well every location in the United States is covered by some form of emergency number that will take you to a call center that handles and processes and is accountable for the various requests for service that may come from their community. These requests range from things that are completely not police issues. You'll find in this body of data informational requests. You'll find sort of neighbor disputes in those data. And then you'll find that parent, the initial point of contact where somebody is reporting a serious hazard or a safety issue, and all the way down to a very serious criminal violation. From that record, we log all of the responses to it. So from an accountability standpoint, making sure that in this day of sort of telephony and urban concentration, all of these calls that come into government to be handled are actually addressed. So they serve a really critical accountability piece, but they also capture really rich performance data, understanding kind of how quickly those calls get dispersed, what resources go to those calls, how long it takes somebody to get there, how long they spent on that call, and ultimately what came of that call are all sort of standard things that you can find in just about any police service that requires an electronic system to keep track of the myriad requests that they receive from their public. Also included in police data, although as sort of a smaller subset, are those things that are actually police related. So I mentioned before, computer-aided dispatch data includes a lot of performance information and serves kind of that primary accountability purpose. But the records management system that, again, most police departments manage or have as part of their suite of police administrative data and systems contains that child information, or that next related record down that workflow line, where you'll find the police report. So as police respond, a patrol officer may ask you, a couple of questions, identify a violation of law, and take a police report. They'll add some information about locations, people, places, and things. And most of these systems, again, are fairly standard. So most departments in the United States will have them. And a lot of them actually now, I think better than 95%, conform to the National Incident-Based Reporting System standard, which is it is the sort of crime data reporting standard that was really designed by researchers for researchers to kind of take that national crime statistics reporting to the next level, where we have really kind of rich, although generalized, data across the United States that allows us to dig into who's the victim of crime, who's committing crimes, what do those crimes pertain to, what are the outcomes for those crimes. So again, a really rich source that should be available in most modern police services. And then there's all of that other data that exists within these systems. Everything that you need to make a police department function, everything from internal affairs programs that manage and process internal complaints about employees through equal employment, EEO type data. You can find those types of complaints in there, and HR data. And depending on what your question is, some of these things may specifically pertain to police performance, or in the other direction, police performance in the criminological environment may help inform a more sophisticated perspective on those data elements. A really interesting and kind of emergent component of these secondary police data systems are those data that are generated under this kind of reform period that a lot of police departments are going through, either voluntarily or in a compelled fashion. And those specifically have to do with the constitutionality or the propriety of the delivery of police services. Terry stops, those investigative stops that police are allowed to make under reasonable suspicion. Response to people in behavioral crisis or people with mental illness are generally documented in there. Use of force, pursuits, all of these other areas that we find the public are interested in, legislatures are increasingly interested in, and academia is quite interested in, are found in these sources that are either directly entered into the records management system or maintained in a side system. But the hard part about this is, how do I get access to those data? So I'm going to go over real quick some of the ways that you can access those data and some of the ways that you can form partnerships that help you facilitate that access, and then understand how to use the data, because they're not always necessarily what they appear to be. First of all, open data requests are available from an increasingly number of police services, or open data is available from an increasing number of police services. Lots of police departments find that proactively posting the data that is most often requested or may be of the most interest to the general public serves an important transparency function, and also helps to kind of invite researchers and academics and activists and community members to a rich conversation about what problems we're trying to solve together. So I usually try to start my exploration of a problem by trying to look for open data. While artificial intelligence is questionable in a variety of ways, it does a wonderful job of decoding the semantic variables, the myriad ways that somebody can name these programs. So if you go on to I think Google has an AI augmented search function now. Look for police open data in your jurisdiction or in the area of interest, and it'll usually find all of the different ways that those data are available. And like I said, for the most part, a lot of agencies provide those data, and they provide a relatively reasonable way to decode and understand them. Freedom of Information Act requests are also something that can be made of most jurisdictions, both local and federal level. You can generally access a web page for the department and submit a formal request for records that are under state law or federal law or whatever the overriding jurisdiction happens to be. You are entitled to those. So Another way to get access to those data is through those Freedom of Information requests. And then obviously, my favorite way to get access to these data is actually through research collaborations with academics and research or analytical resources in the department that may have them. A couple of quick links to two of these things, open data here on the left and public records request for the Seattle Police Department on the right. We do tend to monitor the public data requests in case one of them happens to look like it might be from an academic or a researcher. But we don't do any quid pro quo. And I think a lot of agencies are this way. We just really want to make sure that you understand the data that you are requesting, you have access to it, and that you know how to work with it. But generally, if we see a public data request that comes in through our public records system and we identify it, we make it very clear that there is no quid pro quo. You can keep your public data request, but we would also like to help you work with those data, provide some logistical and subject matter expert support. So consider those two options, but also if you are fortunate enough to have access to somebody in one of those agencies, I cannot stress enough the value of research partnerships. Being able to work with somebody who can tell you specifically what those data points mean, they can give you a sense for what's good about the data, they can give you a sense about for what's bad with those data is really essential to making sure that you don't misunderstand something. With the public data, for instance, we put quite a lot of effort into trying to provide a comprehensive code book that also indicates some high-level data governance issues, and also to make sure that those data are generally fairly consistent. And I would advise somebody to use them for analytics or analytical purposes. But it's also really important to make sure that you have somebody to bounce your ideas off of, to be able to vet your conclusions with. And that's really, I think, where recognizing or identifying somebody in one of those agencies that serves in a crime analysis function, or being able to forge a relationship with kind of a new and emergent group of us professionals in a lot of these agencies, the pracademics, is really important. I do consider myself to be a pracademic. I sit kind of right between academia and practice. And my job fundamentally is to be an embedded researcher and consultant within a police service. Increasingly, a lot of us are coming to work in the 18,000 plus agencies in the world. And a couple of places that you, in the United States, and a couple of places that you can go to find those pracademics, and hopefully a pracademic near you, are the NIJ Lead Scholars Program, the NIJ Law Enforcement Advancing Data and Sciences Program is available. You can read through the bios there. I'll show you a link here in a second. Read through the bios and hopefully find somebody that's close to you, maybe who has a research interest that you share, and be able to reach out to that person, see if you can and form a research partnership. Also, the George Mason University Evidence-Based Policing Hall of Fame is a wonderful resource, not just for pracademics, but also for people who are leaders in this space. You'll find a lot of chiefs of police there, a lot of people of rank, and a lot of sort of senior researchers on that list. And I highly encourage you, if you're looking to work with some of these data, to reach out to either one of those groups of people and see if you can maybe start a research partnership. Real quickly, 2 QR codes that'll take you to both of those programs. NIJ Lead Scholars on the left and the Evidence-Based Policing Hall of Fame on the right. And so with that, I think in just about 9 minutes left, I will go ahead and open it up for some questions.
Perfect, thank you. And we already have our first question in the Q&A, but I'd invite other participants, please do put your questions in the Q&A feature on Zoom. Our first question is, can you speculate on how academics could be valuable to your agency and to other agencies? And specifically, what kinds of research would be most useful?
Yeah, excellent. You know, I think one of the assets that we overlook is the perspective that, you know, sort of very diverse domains may have on policing and police data. So we have sort of a two-pronged approach to this. Mostly, we take all comers. We have a very broad and diverse network of researchers that we work through over the last 12 or 13 years or so. We've forged relationships with over 100 researchers and over 50, I think we're getting close to 60 research institutions around the world. And mostly those come from somebody looking for data or somebody who catches me at a conference or one of my colleagues at a conference. And unless your research proposal is obviously poorly formed or maybe potentially dangerous, and I have to say, in the time I've been doing this, I haven't encountered one of those, we're interested in supporting you. We also look for those requests as they come in through the public records process, reach out to academics and begin to flesh out that network there. And I will say the thing that we find most valuable is that all of you, not coming from this world, tend to have a perspective on these data and a set of questions that we don't necessarily think about. So we're happy to indulge those, but we also, sort of once we've worked on a project with you, we'll ask if we can add you to our research network. And then occasionally we do have questions that come up that are specifically related to a policy initiative that we have or an emergent problem. And we may reach out to that research network, pose that idea, pose a partnership, and see if somebody wants to collaborate with us. So long story short, we're interested in all questions. I don't think it does us any good to confine our scope or our focus, and until we end up overwhelmed with these types of questions, we don't tend to censor too much. So send us your request and we'll see whether we can work something out.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question about capacity related to that. So it sounds like you haven't sort of hit a point where your capacity is limited quite yet, but I suspect that other agencies might not be in that position where they might have some limitations to their capacity. Could you talk about how you might approach an agency, first of all, from a first point of contact, how you might frame a question that you have, but also if you aren't able to reach anyone or if you hit issues on the academic side with them not having capacity, things like this, how you might go about approaching that topic.
Yeah. So again, feel free to send me a message if you're thinking about doing some research and you would like to get connected with somebody. Chances are I might know someone, and I'm happy to help you kind of work through that initial proposal. Give you some of my feedback on whether that's even a viable question or whether there may be data that can be worked on there, and then I'm happy to see if I can reach out and find somebody who will partner with you. Also, going through those sections on the NIJ Lead Scholar Program, on the GMU Evidence-Based Policing Hall of Fame, finding somebody who's close to you or somebody who may be interested in the work that you're doing, and just cold reach out to them. LinkedIn is good as well. Also, if you're interested in doing this work, I highly recommend attending the American Society of Criminology Conference. That's every November. And also the American Society of Evidence-Based Policing, which really does actually include a lot of those pro-academic partnerships. You'll find a lot of the ASEVP researchers have directly partnered with agencies. And so that's a wonderful forum to be able to kind of source that network and those relationships and get something off the ground. But if you have any questions, please feel free to send me a message. I'm happy to help you work on it.
Great. We have another question. Are there any law enforcement data sets that you think are especially valuable but are underutilized by academic researchers?
And I love them all. I think the really interesting thing about these is these are data that are built for one purpose. And because they're built for that one sort of obvious purpose, receiving a call for service or documenting a crime, and then managing an electronic system that keeps that business process flowing, they contain all sorts of really interesting data about how police services function. I got my master's degree in behavioral profiling, serial sexual homicide in particular, and I thought, this is the bee's knees. I'm going to study violence, aggression, and psychopathy. And as it turns out, I find the way that people do business in these platforms and on these systems and how police departments grow these systems organically to be very interesting. So I would say some of the things that are underutilized and maybe very effective in helping police be more efficient, more accountable, more user-friendly, both to the officer as well as to the public, live in those administrative systems and represent that business process flow, or may represent the evolution of those systems as they're trying to comply with new standards, Those administrative data related to how those systems function are a real gold mine. And I highly recommend, if you're interested in sort of process or networks or interesting predictions, looking at those data is a rich source.
Great. Yeah, so there's one other question so far. Seattle is lucky to have you, they say. What does the future hold? What new data sources is Seattle starting to gather?
Oh, I think you froze again.
Oh, am I back?
Oh, sorry, I think you froze again. Am I back?
I think I might be back. Yeah, it
Okay.
says Seattle is lucky to have you. What does the future hold? What new data sources is Seattle starting to gather?
Oh boy, I don't know. If we add many more data systems, I think somebody is going to cut off my funding stream, and the people who work for me are going to quit. So I will say the first of all, thank you very much. I am lucky to have Seattle, and there are lots of agencies out there who are looking to do the same kinds of things that we are here. We are incredibly fortunate that our community has invested in this functionality, and we've been using that really to go out to a bunch of systems that have grown up in silos over years. Lots of resources, technical resources that get allocated to police services are really sort of seen as monolithic, and their enterprise utility or sort of broader cost of ownership is not always considered. And so we've been spending the last 10 years or so finding ways to relate those systems and make them interface a little more effectively. Really exciting thing that's on the horizon for us is being able to integrate with some of the alternate first responders that are increasingly becoming important to managing some of these social problems. Being able to integrate with social service providers or co-responders or those alternate first responders that may have a purpose-built mental health background and can really provide that specialist response service, being able to give them information that may directly pertain to the subject that they're interacting with so they can provide better service, or maybe important safety information is really critical when you're talking about things like law enforcement assisted diversion, assuring that the person who's providing case management under that diversionary program is also able to communicate in near real time with the police and receives information about when their client may have had contact with the police, really connects those two pieces and allows that dyad to work as one management unit. And that really, I think, is the essence of law enforcement assisted diversion. So the future for us is really about building out those relationships and using these data to connect disparate parts of the system, the criminal justice system at large, and also those broader social services that are available increasingly to communities.
All right, and we are just about at time, but I think there's one more question that's sort of brief. For anyone who wants to move over into the academic side of policing, what statistical software or programming languages do you suggest they learn?
Yeah, so SPSS is a great place to start, obviously, but I think you'll find that most agencies can't afford SPSS or SPSS subscription, or even Tableau. You may be stuck with something that's part of the normal Office suite like Power BI. So I would say the best two utilities that you could master would be Python. Python and R are increasingly important. There are a lot of really slick things masterful. You can take that complicated statistical process that you specialize in and maybe transform that into a dashboard. Both of those platforms contain utilities that do that dashboarding. But if you can't, there's always Power BI, and Power BI does a really good job of being able to warehouse and process and visualize those data with kind of push button functionality. Those are two great things to master. If you want to take it to the next level, Tableau really puts shovel-ready data in the hands of people who are trying to answer questions now. And if you want to take it to the very next level, specializing in the resources that many of the cloud providers have available that allow you to take that Python or R knowledge and really process it at a very high level, engaging large language models and very large data warehouses or data lakes is really important. So start with the basics, start with the things that agencies may be able to afford, and then work up as your interests take you, and hope that an agency can afford them eventually.
Great. Yeah, I think there are so many more questions on this topic. It's really eye-opening to hear about your experience from this policing side. We hear so much oftentimes, especially in this series, about the academic side. But yeah, this has been really, really helpful. And thank you so much for taking the time. I'll definitely plug again to stay in touch with the work of the committee. Please do sign up on our Google form and follow us on our website. But yeah, thank you again, Lauren. We really appreciate your time today. And thanks everyone for coming.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.